Hi, my name is Basile Trimbur. I'm working at Kayentis as a medical and scientific officer and a patient advocacy lead. Today, I'll talk about patients and clinical data management. First, are clinical trials becoming more complex? There are complexities between trials. Global trials are one of them, because global means different regulatory environments, cultures, and languages. All of these create complexities for the trial's logistics. Patient population. Because trials want to treat specific patient populations, we have to include this population in the trial, which means dealing with geographical distribution cultures leading to recruitment difficulties. 80% of trials do not reach their recruitment target. Finally, despite the technological adjustments, such as decentralized clinical trials, we know that these changes result in longer than average clinical trial durations. All of this has consequences: loss of effectiveness, higher cost, and impact on patients' data. For patients, we know that, for example, 40% of patients become non-adherent to IMP after 5 months. Or 90% of patients want decentralized solutions. Why do all these complexities have an impact on patients? Because patients' expectations have evolved, they are now truly expressed by the patients themselves. Patients want studies aligned with their expectations by setting up payrolls, for example, and they want a personalized approach in the trial. About the data, 88% increase in data points in the last 10 years. All sites may use up to 15 different systems to manage a trial. All the complexities in a clinical trial have a real impact on the data. New trials are increasing the amount of data collected, creating additional complexity. Data has evolved alongside patient expectations, becoming increasingly complex. The different systems are increasing: e-consent, EQA, wearables. Today, clinical trials have to manage larger, more varied datasets, which means more challenges for design and analysis. The consequences are also on sites, as they have to manage different systems, or the fact that clinical trial protocols are even more complex. They do not have time for patients, which means that patients are lost and therefore become less compliant or less involved in the trial. And all this leads to poor data quality, which results in the study failure and economic impact. The good news is there are solutions integrating different technologies for better solutions. For example, training for patients and sites. But that's not all. The data manager can play a role in helping the sites, making their life easier, and therefore helping patients. To illustrate this, I'm going to show different examples of the collaboration between the data manager and the sites and how this collaboration can help patients. I have 3 examples based on ECOA data, because ECOA data is the only data provided by patients. And this is an example that I believe data managers can understand. First example: you have a patient coming to the site for their first visit. Unfortunately, the sites run out of time and they choose another application for the patient. So the patient completes the questionnaire on a different application but doesn't know this and is going to complete the questionnaire normally. The site realizes that the data completion is not on the correct application and asks the patient to do it again. But the patient refuses because it takes time. It's not his fault and doesn't understand why he should do it, which is completely understandable. The sites, therefore, has to type information into the correct system, so they need to request credentials from the patient and then enter the data into the correct system. So there are several important factors to consider here. First, the lack of time at the outset results from a loss of data entry time on discharge. So sites do not have time initially, but then they have to spend time at the end. Second point, the patient is frustrated and doesn't understand the situation. So the fact that, as a site, or whoever informs a patient that what they did was not correct or they have to do it again, this creates frustration for the patient. And finally, the site needs to access information that is typically confidential. So this is a GCP breach. Second example, we have a study with site visits and diaries at home for the patient. Here, the site must indicate dates for the next visit to allow the diary to be opened and thus notify the patient to complete within a given time period. The site makes a mistake and enters a different date, and the patient collection period, which was supposed to be 7 days, becomes 30 days. In this situation, an excessive amount of data is collected in and outside GCP, and the clinical trial protocol is not respected. And furthermore, the patient's time is wasted. Final example. In a pediatric study involving a caregiver and an adolescent, both the patient and the caregiver have separate diaries to complete. The patient here, who usually completes their diary after the site visit, contacts with the site team to say that there is no diary available. So the site team passes this information onto the data manager. They find that everything is in order. Time goes by because you have various exchanges between sites and the data manager. Consequently, the session closes before any data is collected. The diary was intended for the caregiver, not for the patient. The multiple sources of the data, the patient and the caregiver, as well as the lack of clarity in the data entry protocol led to a loss of data. So what is common for this example? Different risks. Patient-related, or in the three examples you have the patient feeling frustrated because first, they don't understand the solution. Second, because you have to collect more data than expected. And third, because they don't understand what they need to do. Is the caregiver or the patient who is required to complete the questionnaire. It also has an impact on the patient and site collaboration because patients want to trust their site, want to trust their doctors. And if the doctor is making a mistake, or if it's not clear for the patient or the site, these are the real impacts on the trust relationship between these two and also on compliance, because if the patient is frustrated and doesn't have trust or confidence in the site, they have a much higher risk of being less compliant. Also, the data quality. We have multiple examples of GCP breaches here and data collection. We have a loss of patient data in an example, complete data in the third one. These risks create action areas for the data manager. First things first. The initial approach is to involve the data manager as early as possible in the implementation process. Work with them to ask the essential questions. Are the data collected essential, and does it make sense to make questions mandatory for exploratory measurements? Collecting too much data increases the risk of data loss. It's tedious for both sites and patients. Creating queries for exploratory measures burdens sites and data managers. We must focus on essential data. The idea is to push data manager inclusion and amendments, to propose a cleaning plan based on essential or critical data, and finally adapt data collection to meet patients' needs. Can data be collected at home? Because patient comfort is improved when they have more options available. Rely on data manager experience for better implementation, continuity during the trial, and good coordination. Second aspect is investing time in data manager and site collaboration. It's essential because it can be reflected in the patient experience. For example, the data manager can create documentation, simple and efficient videos to save time, and the site sees the data manager, so this humanizes the relationship. Also, you can provide support based on the previous step, such as implementation, for example, and analysis of trends on points of vigilance or error with the assistance of past studies. In this way, the data manager can position themselves as a partner to the sites. They can propose reports to understand where different mistakes come from. They can customize reports to identify the potential inconsistencies by specific sites, for instance, or if a patient is not observant in a particular site or study. The idea is to proactively help the site, and if needed, set up a meeting for discussion. The idea is to invest time in appropriate materials for the sites to guide them towards shared objectives, which are patient well-being, faster development of effective treatments, and adherence to good clinical practices. Finally, two skills are crucial for informing patients. As a data manager, a deep understanding of the technology. Of course, understanding of the various user perspectives. And also strong communication skills. Because creative communication with the various participants, preparing when necessary, adapting to the audience, is going to engage and accompany the sites. So, this relationship between data manager, site, and patient can have multiple benefits. First, if you do so, site staff are going to be confident. They can rely on you and the documentation, giving them more time for their patients. And so patients are going to be fully engaged because they're going to have less burden. They're going to be free and understand and spend time with the sites and have less trouble understanding the clinical trial. And finally, if the patient is engaged, they will be more compliant. So the idea is to collect necessary data, high quality data, and with the patient engaged, that will be the case. It's crucial for all stakeholders to be aware of the patient's experience. Knowing what happened to the patient helps you understand the entire system and propose solutions. So finally, as a data manager, I want to say make sites and patients your priority. This means understanding from the patient's perspective, knowing the burden of a clinical trial, which also means increasing your collaboration with your sites because your point of contact is going to be the site. So when you understand the site, when you understand the patient, you're going to be able to have even better solutions to provide, and also to continuously develop your soft skills, which are absolutely essential in the site and patient relationship. Thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye.